Sunshine Coast, we're here today with Mr. Peter Wellington. Peter is the State Member of Parliament for Nicklin. Peter, thanks for meeting with us today.
Pleasure.
So, look, we're here today continuing our ongoing investigation into road widths and the implications on verge parking, traffic and
Yes.
that kind of thing. So, just first off the bat, do you think that the minimum road width standards as set under the state government planning instruments are wide enough to suit communities' actual needs, as a kind of yes or no?
Well, some of the new communities which are being built on the Sunshine Coast, the road widths that have been approved and are being built are simply too narrow.
Okay.
No question about that.
Yep.
Too narrow. There's not the capacity for vehicles to park, for visitors to houses in those roads to park in front of the house.
Yes.
And the estates which are being built are designed where there might be a combination of perhaps 4 car parking spots in the road along that corridor
To service a multitude
to
of
service
houses.
a multitude of housing. So my view is those estates are simply
Not providing enough parking.
not providing enough car parking.
Yeah. So, having that point kind of nice and clear, we created a poll last night. We've shared it across the entire Sunshine Coast, and that will be open indefinitely while we continue the investigation. And at this point in time, we've got 60 odd replies, and not surprisingly, at 60 yeses, they're too narrow, and no nos. So, moving on from that, in our interviews so far, we seem to have had this toing and froing between who's responsible and not a clear path on how, voters, constituents can request their local and state government representatives to kind of have a look at why they are so narrow and make them wider. So I understand that previously, in one of your previous roles, that you were a councillor at Maroochy Shire Council. So I suppose it puts you in kind of a unique position. Now, that being the case, can you offer any advice to local councils themselves, because we're going to continue to interview councillors, on how they can better work towards quality shared outcomes with their state government counterparts for the benefit of the community?
Well, the first thing is, when these new communities are being approved by council, they need to not just set the minimum road widths, but be more generous. My understanding is the legislation says what the minimum road widths need to be.
Yes.
That doesn't mean a mandated requirement. So I would urge councils to learn from the current experience, where the explanation for the narrower road widths has been on the basis that there'll be public transport, there'll be all these linkages in place, so people don't need to rely on the motor vehicle. That simply is not happening, and I don't see it happening for quite some time yet. So my view is the minimum road width experiment has not succeeded. Communities are being challenged all the time when residents have visitors to come and visit and stay and there's not enough car parks available. If the council wants to go down more of the minimum road widths, well, they need to make sure it's in locations where there is the availability for public transport, not in some of the communities that are being approved and developed as we speak. So hypothetically, if the council approves a minimum road width, they can change that. But if it's the case that council approves a wider road length and the developer doesn't think it's fair and reasonable, the developer is able to go off to the court and challenge that. If the court is then adopting a philosophy that minimum is mandated,
Yes.
if it's a case the courts are saying, no, we will overturn all of these minimum road width conditions which council has approved. So assuming council is approving applications or recommending wider road widths, but the developer is challenging those in the courts. If the developer is challenging those wider road widths in the court and is having success in the court, that then falls back on the state government to review and say, if their minimum road widths policy is not being applied and was intended, which is a minimum, not a mandated, well then I think it falls on the responsibility of the state government to say, our intention is not being acted on. The courts are not following our intention and basically mandating all of these roads to be the smaller width, well, I think that then requires the state government to amend the appropriate legislation, either by way of an Act of Parliament or the regulations. Often this is contained within the regulations, and,
Yes.
and ministers can easily amend amendments to regulation without needing the full challenge and debate on the floor of Parliament. So if a regulation is amended by a minister, members of Parliament still have an opportunity to debate and argue that on the floor of Parliament. What they simply need to do is, once that regulation has been amended, they can give notice of a motion to rescind that regulation. That will then give members of Parliament a chance to debate that.
Yes, yes.
All right, so if the courts are overturning plant council's recommendations for road widths, and they are doing it regularly, and that's not consistent with the state government's intent, well then it's on the responsibility of the state government to amend those regulations.
Fantastic. So, look, that really provides a point of clarity moving forward with what we're investigating, because what that means is council is ultimately has a shared responsibility unless they can show that they're consistently putting through refusal of development applications and recommending wider roads. Therefore, it would fall back on the state government. If they're not doing that, whether it's through apathy because there has been a precedent set in the past, it would really be a situation then where local government has to, I suppose, get in contact with the state members of Parliament and say, okay, here's our track record of applying for wider roads. Here's a point in time we just went, this is a waste of our time. We're spending taxpayers or council payers' rates on going and fighting cases that are consistently overturned. So I think from my perspective, as we move forward investigating it, there's some very important points.
That's just spot on.
Yeah.
If council is not prepared to condition these development applications with wider road widths, the council can't say, not our responsibility. So council has a responsibility of putting the condition wider road widths. It then falls on the responsibility of the developer, the applicant,
Yes.
to either challenge that in a court or do further negotiations with council.
Yes.
And then if it goes to the courts and the state government is not happy with the decisions the courts are making, or more importantly, the state government believes their minimum road width policy is being abused,
Yes.
simply so the developers can make more money out of their estate by having more houses or whatever built, well then it's on the responsibility of the state government to amend the regulation.
And that statement is a fantastic segue to the next question. We have witnessed the Sunshine Coast Mayor Mark Jamieson. He was on ABC Radio over the last few weeks, and he was actually questioned by a member of the community in Brightwater, saying, why are the roads so narrow? And his response was that the current standards actually contribute to more affordable housing. Do you see that is actually transferring, narrower roads are transferring to more affordable housing?
Well, I can't speak for the Mayor or the Council as to why they're approving this. So on what you're saying, the Mayor is justifying the narrow road widths because they want to have more houses
It would
in
appear
that
that
estate.
way, yeah.
So effectively he's saying we want more houses in the estate. What we need to do is to have a review of the effect of that policy. And I
Yes.
believe the review would be supported by the community, where the community says the experiment is not successful.
Yes.
We want the council to go back to having wider roads instead of the current system the council is adopting in approving these new developments.
Fantastic. So, look, last question. We're trying to keep it short and sweet because people like to not be online for too long. We've heard from local councillors of a program called Red Tape Reduction, which was apparently an initiative by the state government, and that empowered private organisations to actually put through development approvals. And it appears, according to councillors, that often councillors can actually find out about developments being approved by these private organisations via disgruntled constituents, which seems to be a breakdown in the democratic process. You're aware of this red tape reduction program or initiative?
Well, I have some real concerns, and I have for some time, about the way you can get what I term as private certification for applications My view is these applications should all be going for council. I believe history shows numerous cases where private certifiers have done the wrong thing. That has cost members of the community, council and state government money in challenging these decisions. I'm not convinced that private certification is the way to go. I know it's all about making money. Some people who support it say this is about reducing red tape. I believe there have been some shonks in the industry, in the private certification, and we need to weed them out. You only need one bad apple to bring the credibility of many other certifiers into question. But I think the issue that you've asked me predominantly is about whether we need to review the width of our roads in our new estates. And bearing in mind, it is only the new estates that are having these real challenges. All I can say is my experience is the road widths are too narrow.
Yes.
The experiment has not worked. Whether you call it affordable housing, whatever, I think we need to go back to having wider road widths instead of the current model which some of our councils are adopting.
Fantastic. Peter, look, thank you very much for your time. You've provided a lot of clarity for us as we move forward, and we really thank you for appearing with us today.
Pleasure, Matt. All the best.
Thanks, Peter.